Welcome to Growing Your Team, a podcast designed for small business owners seeking to grow their company with the help of employees and contractors. Your time is limited, which means growing and leveraging teams is essential for business success. The Growing Your Team podcast is the place to learn tips and techniques designed to help you know when it's the right time to hire, how to select perfect fit team members, and how to maximize productivity while creating a positive work environment. Drawing from her 10-plus years of leadership and hiring experience, here is your host, Jamie Van Kuyk.
Hello, Jamie Van Kuyk here, and welcome back to the Growing Your Team podcast. Today, I'm telling you how to exit a bad interview early. If you've ever conducted interviews before for your business, this has probably happened to you. You're shortly into an interview and you realize this is not the candidate for the position. And you're wondering, how do you get out of this without offending the candidate and without continuing to waste your time? So today, I'm going to tell you what I do to get out of these situations so you can respect everyone's time, but also make the candidate feel valued. First, one of the things I want to talk about with this is last episode 114, we talked about how many times you should interview a candidate before making a decision. And one of the things I shared in that episode was there will be times when you interview a candidate once and they seem amazing. And then you have a second interview where you're going to go deeper into some topics and talk on more topics. And you realize in that interview that they're not the right fit. And the reason why I want to bring that up again is a bad interview does not necessarily mean you did a poor job at reviewing a resume or a poor job evaluating candidates the previous interview round. It often means the questions are doing their job and uncovering the right information about the candidate, about what you need to know. With the resume, just remember, resumes are gatekeepers. You can only get so much information from a resume, so that first interview is your opportunity to learn more about their work history. And sometimes that more you learn will quickly say, hey, this is a person I need to talk to more and ask more in-depth questions. Or, okay, yep, they match their resume, but the way they applied it, the way we interpret this is really not a fit for the job. And it's the same kind of with that second interview that you'll have with a candidate, and possibly that third is not everyone who moves on is going to be right for the role. Each phase of the interview process is to make the pool smaller and smaller because you're asking more questions and you're doing more work to identify who is the right fit. So it is 100% normal for you to be in interviews and know pretty quickly into that interview that someone is not the right fit and will not be moving forward in the process. At the same time, you want to make sure you're giving candidates a chance to succeed. Candidates are nervous during the process, so sometimes those first few questions can be a little tricky. They can not be great answers that the candidate gives because they're still building rapport with you. They're trying to overcome those nerves. Remember, people are not interviewing just for the fun of it. They're interviewing because they need a job. And jobs help keep a roof over people's head and food on the table. So they are interviewing because they need an opportunity to work. They are interviewing because maybe their current opportunity is not a good fit for them. And this can bring out a lot of nerves. So you always want to make sure you ask a good number of questions before ending an interview early, just to give that candidate a chance to recover. So what my process always is, if a candidate seems to not be a good fit from the start of the interview, bounce around a little bit with questions. Instead of going down 1 through 15 of my prepared questions, maybe I ask question 1, 2, 5, 8, 10, go back to 3 and stuff like that to see, okay, let me ask about a few different areas, give them an opportunity to feel more comfortable, and then get into some of the deeper questions that maybe go go a little bit, deeper into the topics after I identify, do they have the basics of this area? So that's always one thing to keep in mind is sometimes it does take a little bit for a candidate to warm up and be able to perform at their best. People are not expert interviewers out there when they're interviewing for jobs. Okay. But how do you exit an interview early? When you identify that someone really isn't the right fit, you've given them the benefit of the doubt, you've asked a good handful of questions. And here is what I do. First, it starts at the very beginning of the interview. When I start an interview, I always introduce myself. I don't care what this person already knows about me ahead of time. I even tell my clients, yes, they should know the company they're interviewing for. I provide, when I'm doing the recruiting, I tell people who they're interviewing with. But even though they might know who you are and your role within the company before that interview starts, you should still introduce yourselves. So I always say, for example, when I'm recruiting on behalf of my clients, hi, I'm Jamie Van Kuyk. I am the hiring consultant that is working with XYZ company to help them fill whatever the position is. Then I go and say this important information. We have X amount of time scheduled together today. It might or might not take us that entire time. It just depends on how long it takes us to get through the questions that I have. By saying this, I've already put out the idea that we might not take the entire time, but we have it if we need it. That way, it's not like, hey, we have 45 minutes scheduled together. We're going to take that entire time. And then 20 minutes in, I'm just like, oh my gosh, now how do I fill the next 25 minutes? No, I've already said we might not take the entire time. It just depends on how long it takes us to get through the questions that I have. It's also stating that I have a prepared list of questions, but guess what? They don't know how many questions are on your interview guide. They don't know whether you've asked them everything or not. Then I try to ask questions to take up at least 50% of the time. So once again, candidates can be nervous and it can take them a little bit of time to really get into the groove of the interview with you. So by asking at least questions that take up 50% of the time, you've given them that opportunity to become more comfortable with the interview, to start being able to give you good answers versus those highly nervous answers that might not be helping them portray themselves at their best. If we've gone through a good handful of questions at that time, I'll typically say something like, we're flying through the questions. I have one more question for you. If we are not going through a lot of questions because the candidates are really long talker, I might say something along the lines of, you're giving me so much information in your answers. There's a lot of questions I'm not going to ask because it'll just be repeating. You'll just have to repeat yourself. And I don't want to waste your time doing that. So let me look through my questions to see if I need anything else. And then take a moment to look through the questions and we'll typically reply with, okay, here's one more area I would like to talk about, and then ask that question. Yes, in that case, you are telling the candidate that there's questions you're not asking, but you're telling them why. You've already given me a lot of information. I don't want to take your time to have you repeat yourself. So let me see what else we need to cover. Both of these ways are wrap up. So that way it's not like you asked a question, they think there's more coming, and you're like, okay, we're done. Let's wrap up. Because that can kind of make that uneasy feeling with the candidate that they're failing the interview. You are cutting things off early, and you don't want them to feel that way. You want them to feel that you are valuing their time. Even if they're not the candidate that you are going to select, that you are valuing them through the process. So just to recap, go through a good handful of questions during the interview to give the candidate an opportunity to really show you who they are and their ability. This could mean you bounce around in your prepared list of questions, because remember, you should always have a prepared list of questions when you go into an interview. But the two things you want to do in addition to that is, one, preface the interview by telling them that the interview might not take the entire time. So once again, the language I use is, we have X amount of time scheduled together today. It might or might not take us this entire time. It just depends on how long it takes us to get through the questions that I have. And then you always want to wrap it up by saying, I have one more question for you. And this could be, if you got through a lot of questions, we're flying through the questions. I have only one more question for you today. Or it could be, if they're a really long talker and you're not getting through a lot of questions, you say something along the lines of, you're giving me so much information in your time. Let me rephrase that. You're giving me so much information in your answers, and I want to value your time and not make you repeat yourself. Let me see if there's anything else I need for this interview round. Take a moment to look through your questions and then say, okay, here's one more question I would like to ask you, and then wrap up the interview from there. Even if you know a candidate is not the right fit, I say still wrap up an interview properly. Thank them for their time. Let them know what those next steps are, which is typically, you will hear from me by X date on whether you're moving forward to the next round of interviews or not. Or you'll hear from me by X date on whether you will be getting the position. That is my advice on how to wrap up an interview early when you identify that a candidate is not the right fit. Once again, it will happen. The goal of interviewing is to get closer and closer to your ideal candidate. So each round of interviews you go through, you're going to be able to cross candidates off the list. And like I said, even candidates that maybe in your first round you thought were a shoo-in for the position, or they had the most amazing resume, and now that you're talking to them, you're like, okay, how I interpret their work on their resume and what they meant by that is not the same thing. So there's always going to be candidates that you were excited about that you're going to get into the interview and not be so excited. So it's okay to wrap up an interview early. Just do it in a way that shows the candidate that you are respectful of their time, and that respectful of the fact that they took their time to come in and interview for your opportunity. Remember, interviewing is a two-way street. The candidates are trying to find the right position for them, just as you're trying to find the right candidate. So respect all candidates. But it is okay to end an interview early when you identify that someone is not the right fit. Just set yourself up for success so that way you don't end that interview on a bad note.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Growing Your Team with your host, Jamie Van Kuyk. Be sure to subscribe and head on over to growingyourteam.com to connect, access the show notes, and discover more ways to hire and leverage your perfect fit team.